Hey Keith.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I would like to welcome you all to this webinar on behalf of the National Hazard Mitigation Association in partnership with Millsville University. My name is Brad Bartholomew, and I co-chair the conference committee of NHMA. I'm excited today for our webinar as part of our webinar series, Why Mitigation Matters. I cannot thank today's speakers enough for making the time to share their knowledge and experience with you all today. Today we have Dr. Keith Porter and Dr. David Wald to speak to us on earthquakes, and I'll just give a little bit from their bios on each of them. So Dr. Porter serves as the chief engineer at the Institute of Catastrophic Loss Reduction. He has 35 years of professional and research experience in catastrophic risk management through retrofit and better new design of buildings, utilities, and transportation infrastructure. Uh, Dr. David Wald is a seismologist with the USGS, National Earthquake Information Center. He leads the development and operations of real-time information systems, including ShakeMap, Did You Feel It, Pager, ShakeCast, and Ground Failure. He is currently the past editor-in-chief of the EERI's journal Earthquake Spectra and is an adjunct professor in the geophysics at Colorado School of Mines. We'll go ahead and start with Dr. Porter, who we have about 15 minutes, and he has to drop at 1:45, and then Dr. Wald, and then we'll end with some questions.
Okay, thanks, Bradley. Let me get rid of this thing that's kind of in my way. I'm speaking to you today from Toronto, Ontario. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to tell you about a collaboration that's going to try to persuade people to do disaster mitigation. Now, Melanie asked me to speak about earthquakes. She asked me to follow on with policy stuff, but I'm mostly going to focus on the policy stuff. So I hope you don't mind. Sorry, this thing is still in my way. My talk today is motivated by America's large and growing natural disaster losses. The United States currently spends over $120 billion per year to recover from natural disasters. That's 8% of the country's construction spending, which means that every year, climate disasters wipe out the equivalent of 4 weeks of construction. What's particularly alarming about that is that the losses are increasing 6% per year. That means they're doubling every 12 years. That's 10 times faster than the population is growing and 2 times faster than the economy is growing, which means that in a few years, climate disasters will wipe out 8 weeks of construction, and then 16, and then 32, and that is unsustainable. And it suggests, among other things, that our building code isn't making us safer, that it's not cost effective. Every year that we build to current code and that we fail to fix the existing buildings, we bake in bigger and bigger catastrophes into our future. So if you think catastrophes are bad now, and if you think that they're happening to other people, you are wrong. If you buy insurance or you pay taxes, you are paying for disasters, and you will pay more and more as catastrophe losses grow. You're in this, we're all in this together. This is a societal problem that needs a societal scale solution. The US provides disaster mitigation funds to try to reduce disaster losses. In the late 1990s, FEMA estimated that its mitigation grants saved $4 in avoided losses per $1 spent. But in 1999, the US Congress, suspicious of FEMA's claim and desirous of cutting spending, demanded that FEMA commission an independent study to confirm its assertions of the cost effectiveness of its grants. This is the cover of the resulting 2005 study, which confirmed exactly what FEMA said. This went on to be called the 4-to-1 study, and it went on to be the most cited benefit cost analysis of natural hazard mitigation. It mostly spoke to the retrofit of public sector buildings, and it focused on 3 perils: floods, hurricanes, and earthquakes. As we and our peer reviewers feared, the 4-to-1 ratio was attributed to every kind of natural hazard mitigation effort, other perils, private sector assets, and other approaches to mitigation. Now, Now, I'm not going to bore you with the gory details at how we arrived at that 4-to-1 figure, but here's a thumbnail sketch. Number one, you define the asset that's being mitigated, its location, its use, its engineering and economic attributes. Number two, you characterize the hazard, that is the probabilistic environmental excitation that it can experience, such as a variety of earthquakes that can affect it and their frequency and their severity. Number three, you characterize its vulnerability, meaning you relate the environmental excitation to the damage that it produces on the asset. Number four, you characterize the loss consequences of that damage, meaning you relate the physical damage to repair costs and life safety impacts, loss of function, environmental impacts, and others. And then fifth, you perform some integration over the possible environmental outcomes, damage states, and loss outcomes to calculate a long-term average annual loss. Then you can take that average annual loss and you can calculate its present value under as-is conditions and under what-if mitigated conditions. The difference between the present value under as-is and what-if mitigated conditions is the avoided future loss, which we can call the benefit. The benefit cost ratio is that benefit divided by the cost to do the mitigation. So if the benefit cost ratio is greater than 1, the benefits exceed the costs, and the greater the benefit cost ratio, the more desirable the investment. Now, between 2005 and 2016, FEMA clocked thousands of mitigation efforts that cited mitigation saves, that 4-to-1 study, as inspiration. It was well known that this 2005 study was limited to FEMA grants and ignored many other approaches to natural hazard mitigation. In 2017, 7 groups sponsored an update to that 4-to-1 figure. The 7 groups included FEMA, 2 other federal agencies, and 4 large nonprofits. The work expanded from just federal grants to 4 more mitigation approaches and 2 more perils. Here are the results from that 2019 study. The columns show the 5 approaches to mitigation that we examined: adopting code, building above code, retrofitting private sector buildings, retrofitting utilities and transportation infrastructure, and the federal grants. The rows show the 5 perils that we considered in that study: riverine flooding, hurricane surge, wind, earthquake, and fire in the wildland urban interface. The cells show the benefit cost ratio for each of those combinations. The column headers show some totals. For example, in that second column here, labeled above code, it shows that current code is suboptimal. Exceeding code minimum would save society $16 billion in avoided future losses for every year we build better, at a cost of about $4 billion per year that we build better. Every cell in this table is calculated based on well-accepted, clearly defined, totally practical mitigation options. The work was done by some of America's preeminent disaster engineers and economists and geographers, and it was heavily peer-reviewed by about 70 experts. There is nothing unclear or controversial about these results. Who's using them? They've been cited dozens of times in congressional testimony. FEMA uses them to promote the Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities grant programs. Scholars cite them to support research. Press citations show that community groups, emergency managers, and decision makers from the finance, insurance, real estate, and other industries use them regularly. President Biden quoted the federal 6-to-1 figure dozens of times in the summer and fall of 2021 when he successfully advocated for his $1.3 trillion infrastructure bill. Now, the bad news. We found that, for instance, better codes make a lot of financial sense. But if that's so, if they save so much money, why don't we just change the codes and get it done? Now, here are 3 reasons why that doesn't happen. First, well, it takes time to explain why a code change is needed and to build a consensus on the language for the new code language. It has to be clear and succinct, and it can't conflict with other code requirements. Second, government support matters. In the United States, government long ago abdicated the regulation of building codes to the people that the building code regulates. And third, some participants in the code running process see any added cost for better new buildings as coming out of their pockets, especially builders. New construction competes in the market with existing buildings, and existing buildings are mostly unaffected by code changes. So when the code changes, the price of existing buildings doesn't change as the code becomes more strict, which means that builders can't easily pass on the cost of code changes to buyers because they're competing with these other products that don't change in cost. So unless builders economize on other aspects of new buildings, the cost of new code requirements tends to come out of their pockets. Many of them react like this guy. This is Buddy Hughes, first vice chairman of the National Home Builders Association, America's largest industry group for builders. He spoke to the US Congress on September 25th, 2024, the day before Hurricane Helene struck. The hurricane once again exposed weaknesses in code level flood resilience, but that the day before it struck, Hughes told the US Congress that the modern code goes too far. He told Congress that older, weaker codes were good enough and that code development should stop getting better and perhaps go backwards. Now, Helene showed yet again how untrue those assertions are, but the National Association of Home Builders and other special interests may very well keep saying things like that. That's why I think codes change slowly. But I also told you that retrofitting existing buildings saves society more than it costs on average in the long run. So why aren't we retrofitting everything? Maybe because the owner pays for the retrofit, but other people benefit. Here's an illustration. Suppose you have a house with a basement and you live on a street with a combined stormwater and sewer system. A lot of people do. You could suffer from a basement flood that costs you tens of thousands of dollars to repair. Now, to reduce your risk, you ought to install a backflow valve and a battery backup sump pump and make the soil next to your house slope away from the house. Doing all of that might cost you on the order of $5,000, and you'll be far less likely to have a basement flood. But what exactly does that save you? Well, it's going to save you a lot of nuisance and some lost mementos if a flood happens during your ownership period. But much of the monetary savings go to other people. If you're insured, your insurer avoids an insurance claims. State and federal governments often pay to facilitate the restoration of private property. And if you don't have damage, the state and federal governments avoid those costs. Lenders avoid costs from mortgage distress from homeowners who pay their mortgage late as they struggle to pay for the repairs initially themselves. Now, many cities try to help with grants, try to help by providing grants to help you pay for adaptation measures. In the United States, United States and Canada, something like 30 or more cities pay all or part of the cost to add basement flood protection, those things that I just told you about. And many pay for wind protection, fire protection. This map shows some US and Canadian communities that pay all or part of basement flood protection incentives. But municipalities have a hard time getting people to accept the incentive. Voluntary measures almost uniformly get less than 10% uptake. Why? Well, there's lots of reasons. Grant programs can be so complicated or ambiguous that people don't know how long it's going to take, whether they're qualified, or whether or when the city's going to pay. Perhaps as a result, uptake can be a fraction of a percent of the eligible people per year. In my city, with tens of thousands of supposedly eligible households, they only get tens of households to take the $6,000 grant that they offer. At 0.1% uptake per year, that program helps, but not enough to solve the problem, certainly not enough to move the needle on the basement flooding problem in my community. And in general, voluntary bilateral incentives like that, where there's one person providing the incentive and one person taking it, voluntary incentives, they don't work. They don't move the needle. Now, here's a possible game changer. I told you that mitigation saves. That was the story that came out of natural hazard mitigation saves, that 4-to-1 study, later called the 6-to-1 study. I told you that it produces benefit cost ratios that can be 5 or 10 or more, and that reflects avoided future loss on a long-term average basis. What if mitigation also paid, like the way that repainting your house just before you sell it does? And it turns out that mitigation does pay. This map shows 7 places that other researchers and I studied in several independent projects to check the market value of adaptation measures. These studies found that buyers paid more for resilient homes and landlords commanded faster leasing and rental premiums. They're all high hazard location, and in each, a real estate agent told the buyers about the resilience feature. In each case, the added value greatly exceeded the cost of the resilience investment. Even the National Association of Home Builders' own research supports the suspicion that where people perceive high risk from natural disasters, half are willing to pay at least $5,000 to $7,500 more for a home with above code disaster resilience features, and 20% are willing to spend an additional $25,000 or more. Now, those 20% are likely to be the high bidders for a house built or retrofitted to better resist disasters. I told you that bilateral incentives have tiny uptake and don't move the needle on America's disaster liability. 10 years ago, some colleagues and I at the National Institute of Building Sciences thought about combining multiple incentives, creating what one might call a multilateral incentive network. Between 2017 and 2023, we began to design multilateral incentives in which we get as many of the people who get benefits to help pay for the adaptation measure. When you go to sell your house, your real estate agent might tell you to retrofit because buyers perceive the flood protection as a desirable market feature. Or as the buyer, your insurers might advise you to retrofit and offer lower premiums as an incentive. Your lender might give you the same advice and give you $1,000 at loan initiation to help you pay for a retrofit. All those people get benefits if you do the mitigation. This is ways that they can help you offset or totally pay for the mitigation. Now, all of these incentives actually already exist, but they aren't coordinated. If somebody coordinated them and the repeated message came through from a lot of experts to the person who has to make the investment, and all those messages were combined with a larger pile of monetary incentives, that might drive more people to do retrofit. That's our hypothesis. Here's how we're going to test that hypothesis. In October of 2023, the National Institute of Building Sciences held a webinar to announce its multilateral incentives roadmap 2.0. That's the document on the left. That's the thing that summarized this concept that I've just been telling you about. During that webinar, I called for a community or a group to participate in a pilot study, pointing out that we only had bandwidth for one pilot study. Before the webinar ended, I received an email from staff at the City of Calgary asking to be that pilot study. We're now about a third of the way through the project, and we hope to complete the design of multilateral incentives for 3 or 4 climate perils by December 2025. Let me tell you a couple of steps, the big picture steps in that pilot study. First, we're going to get co-beneficiaries like insurers to help pay for a mitigation measure. You have to define it so that the insurer knows exactly what they're paying for, that it's appropriate to the task. Built the way it needs to be built will actually reduce their risk or raise their revenue. Each hazard has one or more well-accepted solutions. For heat, that's generally heat pumps or air conditioning. More insulation, some other things. For hail, that's impact-resistant roofing, garaging cars in advance of hailstorms, and so on. And you're probably familiar with a variety of earthquake mitigation measures. Our job as part of this pilot study is to describe exactly what one has to do, whom to call, what to ask for, how much it's going to cost, and how to show that it was done right for 3 or 4 of these these resilience products. Then we do a benefit cost analysis to help make the business case to those various influence groups. Here's 2 maps of the ratio of benefits to costs for impact resistant asphalt shingle roofing. Now, don't be frightened by the fact that the map shows Canada. Canada is just a little ahead of the United States in doing this analysis. The same things hold true in the United States. The map on the left shows society's benefit cost ratio. The one on the right shows the benefit cost ratio for the current insurer if the insurer were to pay entirely to put impact resistant shingles on your house after a hailstorm. The insurer is going to care about maps like the one on the right much more than the one on the left. The insurer doesn't care about society's benefit. The insurer cares about the insurer's benefit. We're going to make maps like this and say similar things about benefits to all the various influence groups for the selected resilience packages. Third step is to do outreach meetings with each influence group to test or refine our proposed incentive packages. Our incentive package for impact-resistant roofing might offer real estate agents a brochure about the costs and benefits of impact-resistant roofing, and maybe a handout that they can give at an open house for a house that has an impact-resistant roof. We have not yet designed those products, but hope to do so when we meet in a few months with a group of real estate agents. We begin engagement with 7 influence groups in February. If the Natural Hazard Mitigation Association has any representatives in Calgary or Edmonton or other Alberta municipalities, please feel free to call or text or email me to participate. But our engagement plans are being finalized now, so reach out today if you are interested. Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks, Keith. Good to see you. I know you got to sneak out. I don't know if anyone has any questions for Keith, but I'll take over if not. And Keith, you've seen this before, so by all means, if you want to step out, that's fine with me.
Nice.
As I used to say on Monty Python, now for something completely different. Let's share my screen and jump into PowerPoint. And I take it you can see my screen. All right. Okay, like I said, completely different. So what I'm going to cover is not mitigation, but actually, well, partially mitigation, but really where you can go for earthquake information and how we characterize shaking and impact from earthquakes and where you can go to get that not only for post-earthquake information, but also for mitigation purposes. So I'll give you a little background on, let me just check the chat here in case somebody's trying to get to me. Okay. I'll give you a little background on the National Earthquake Information Center, where I'm from, describe a range of the earthquake products that you might use and how you might use them after an earthquake and for planning, and touch on some of the underlying science in there. Before we get going, though, let's have a game of Jeopardy. This is a recent one a couple weeks ago. The second to last column is U.S. Geological Survey says, and the question is, and you have to remember answer form of a question. Earthquake data is crowdsourced via a program called DYFI, short of for this question we often ask each other here in California. I don't see any hands, but obviously that answer is, what is Did You Feel It? So this is our crown achievement is getting on Jeopardy. Let's talk about Did You Feel It and a few other tools. So first off, at the National Earthquake Information Center, we are the responsible agency for comprehensive monitoring of earthquakes nationally and globally. We report for post-earthquake response and collect an enormous amount of data for both mitigation and decision-making in the planning stages and also response. And to do that, we help run this advanced national seismic system and coordinate regional and urban seismic networks as well as the global system. At the USGS, we also, in Golden, Colorado, we also make this very important probabilistic seismic hazard map, which you've seen, that represents the long-term probabilistic hazard of shaking exceedance. And this map is made up in part by the monitoring that we do, small earthquakes that occur day in and day out, also historic earthquakes in regions of the country that have had large historic earthquakes. But mostly it's dominated by the knowledge of the active faults that are in the area in California and other Western states. But this map is used in a lot of purposes, including what Keith has done for risk calculations, but also for insurance rates and for construction codes and things like that. So it's a very important product. It's not one that I'm involved with. I'm more involved with seismic monitoring. We at Golden, in Golden, Colorado, get thousands of stations from around the world, these triangles, these stations around the globe, and these stations in the United States help us determine magnitude and location, but also map out shaking as quickly as we can. And that is used for loss estimation and other things, situational awareness. But you can see the density of stations in the West is much greater than it is in the central and eastern U.S. And so we need to complement those. And we do that with the Did You Feel It system. So as soon as we determine the magnitude and location at the NEIC, the analysts who are there 7x24 push a button that says, well, they can actually check the data and see if it looks good, if they can modify it slightly and improve the location, they will. And then they hit this button that says publicly release this event, which means that information goes out, it cannot be retrieved at that point. That information initially goes to a variety of different services. One of them is our own earthquake notification service, and anyone could sign up for this to get notifications of magnitude location, but this system's evolving, as I'll show you in a minute. Also, as that event gets sent out, the magnitude location, we build on the fly a web page. This is for the magnitude 7.1 Ridgecrest earthquake. The page doesn't exist, and as soon as the magnitude location go, it gets built. And as new products are generated from that magnitude location, they show up, including the shake map, pager, and ground failure. We'll talk about the fault model of the earthquake source that shows us where the fault was and how much it slipped, and then an aftershock forecast, which helps understand the level of aftershocks that are expected in certain periods of time. These products are available on the webpage. If you just know and Google USGS earthquake, you will find them, but they are also available electronically through feeds and APIs that most people use that are critical users to get these pages automatically. So for instance, the New York Times we've worked with, and the shake maps they lay over their maps that show up within minutes of the shake map being generated. And so they are using our feeds to portray shaking for earthquake information, and a number of other groups from relief organizations to media use the shake map contours and other products to depict the shaking through these types of feeds. These are then used for mostly by meteorologists to describe the shaking and impact. And so they are also able to get these through the feeds rather than pulling over web page content. A lot of my work is interacting with the different user groups throughout the country as well as globally. And the systems that I'll talk about quickly are basically used by a variety of different users. So we have different flavors of the tools, from very simple rendering for media consumption to very complex layers that can be used by engineers for structural analysis and other engineering uses. So the systems that I am mostly responsible for are shown here, and that's Did You Feel It, which is mapping out the shaking intensity color-coded to the intensity level. And these are mapping out felt reports that come in immediately after the earthquake. The shake map, which uses the seismic stations in the ground, as well as the felt reports to map out the intensity of shaking. The shake map goes into the pager system, which estimates the number of fatalities and economic losses in the region affected. There's also the shakecast system, which takes the shake map and lays that over with users' facilities, in this case Caltrans, to show what the likely impact is and the inspection priority for their overpasses and bridges in the state. And then the shake map is also used to determine the likelihood of liquefaction and landsliding in the epicentral region, which can also affect infrastructure and properties considerably in some cases. These systems are actually part of the larger earthquake information system, which is about mitigation, pre-earthquake information, earthquake information, and then post-earthquake response. And that probabilistic seismic hazard map, PSHA, can be used for planning, but also allows us to take parts of that hazard map, the faults in it, to generate earthquake scenarios that can be used for scenario exercises and planning. And we can do that with the shake map system to estimate the shaking, and also the pager system and HAZIS from the from FEMA to estimate losses for those scenarios. But I focus mainly on these post-earthquake tools, and these are all things that we do in-house that we generate and then push from the magnitude location. The shake map gets triggered, pager gets triggered. As I showed you, these things arrive within a few minutes of an earthquake in California, and maybe up to 15 minutes from an earthquake around the globe, where our seismic stations are fewer and far between. Okay, so it's not always been this way. We've been able to do a lot in the recent, but originally we were only putting out the magnitude location when I started this whole process. And so it's very important to have these briefings occasionally because things change quite rapidly, and we're adding some new bells and whistles as we talk. Shake map in particular wasn't around for the Northridge earthquake. This is the 40th anniversary of the Northridge earthquake, so it's a good event to consider. That caused $40 billion of damage and 33 fatalities. And at the time, we only put the magnitude and epicenter on the map within about a half hour. But now we can put out a map that shows the intensity of distribution of shaking, and within a few more minutes, estimates of fatalities and economic losses. Let's see how we get those. Well, the shake map is generated by looking at not only the seismic stations in the area, but considering the geology and also the fault that ruptured it during the earthquake. And that gives us a pattern of shaking intense around the area above the fault. And it's constrained primarily by these seismic stations. So this is the intensity of the ground. This is the acceleration of the ground. And what we've done over the years is develop tools that allow us to record the acceleration and estimate what people would experience or what the damage likelihood is, or take their observations of damage and shaking and estimate what the acceleration of the ground is. So we can actually now take felt reports and add those, which are now circles. The triangles are stations, the circles are felt reports that go into the shake map. And we can supplement the shake map with observations by humans. Now, this isn't so important here in California in this earthquake, but in areas elsewhere, it becomes the most important observations. And I think you probably know the DigiField system. It's a series of questions that we ask individuals, whether they felt it and whether people around them felt it, all the way up to whether there was damage, and we can assign intensities from that. So the magnitude 4.8 New Jersey earthquake that we had this year, we can make a very nice shake map. This is the acceleration of the ground and the underlying population, which is extremely dense. And we're able to do this because we had over 184,000 felt reports. 70% of those were in the first hour. So we got 130,000 responses within the first hour, and that's on the order of 36 entries per second, which is what our web pages need to handle to collect that information. One zip code had almost 1,000 responses. That was Brooklyn. And so we get very robust intensity reports. And there was some damage, intensity 6 level. And this was the most widely reported earthquake we've had in the U.S. history, because it was felt by over 40 million people in years of dense population, as opposed to larger historical events. So when we make a shake map for that earthquake, the triangles here are the stations. Like I said, they're very far apart in the east, but the circles represent reports that can go into the shake map that are representing the population that experienced these intensities. And this combination gives us a very good estimate of the shaking. So for comparable earthquakes in the west and the east, we've seen this time and time again, that in eastern US and Canada, earthquakes of magnitude 6 compared to magnitude 6 in California has a much larger felt area. And that's because the energy propagates to larger distances, because the energy is not as well absorbed as it is in the West, which is hotter, more actively tectonic, and attenuates energy quickly. So we can see this from just the felt reports alone. Okay, so we run Shake Map for the world, but there's a lot of countries running the same software. And so this uniformity of systems allows us to have much better quality information around the globe. And so we have made shake maps for over 14,000 earthquakes over the last 125 years now. And we can use these for understanding what's happened in the past, but also understanding what might happen for an earthquake in any of these locations, where we can estimate the losses. So we make shake maps for many, many historic earthquakes, and we use those, as I'll show you in a minute, to estimate the losses. We can also take the hazard map and generate scenarios for anywhere in the US. And we've done this for hundreds of scenarios. And this allows us to make shake maps with the faults that are active in these regions or small hypocenters, and generate shake maps and estimate losses for those for planning purposes in any part of the country. And in fact, we've already got over 800 scenarios online that can be used not only for exercises, but for estimating losses and for looking at the effects in these regions. Now, PAGER is a system prompt assessment of global earthquakes for response that takes a shake map and estimates losses. And as I said, we've got these thousands of shake maps. We can then take those shake maps, look at the population at the time of the earthquake, and using the losses, estimate what the fatalities are going to be for any future earthquake that has a particular shaking intensity or and population exposure for any country in the world. So this allows us to estimate losses in real time and using a green, yellow, orange, and red alert level for different levels of fatalities and economic losses. We can alert the globe when these such events happen and get the necessary people involved with response and recovery. The typical one-pager product is shown here. This is for the magnitude 7.8 earthquake in Turkey. This was not the first alert that went out. It was initially an orange or red alert, and as we get more data and more information, we can update the losses. So it's very important to check back on the updates that come out of the USGS. But in general, what we're showing here is that we have tens of thousands of fatalities estimated and tens of billions of dollars worth of damage or greater for this particular earthquake. And we have lots more information on these pages about the types of structures, about the historical earthquakes. And on here, we show the population exposure per each intensity level. And when you get millions of people at the higher intensity levels, like we have here, that's when you get very, very large losses. In the US, we have another system called the two-pager, which is relatively new. And rather than working directly with USAID, we've been working with FEMA and their HAZAS software. We will send the shake map to FEMA. They will run HAZAS and send the results back. And we can then generate a two-pager product which shows not just the total losses, the total estimated fatalities and economic losses, but losses by the county level. So we start to now have some spatial resolution for losses. The HAZAS estimated fatalities is shown as an arrow on top of the pager losses. And we can also add output from HAZAS that tells us the estimated number of green, yellow, and orange tagged structures that would be in different use categories that's shown on these tags. We can also map out the losses spatially and give losses for county level that can be used for the county level disaster declarations, not just a state or national level disaster. One other thing that's quite important is the shakecast system. So we look at cities like Los Angeles and we think of all the buildings, commercial and real estate. But when I fly into Los Angeles, I see infrastructure, lots of infrastructure. And the shakecast system is aimed at infrastructure users to understand what happened immediately after an earthquake. The shakecast system runs either on their infrastructure or their own internal systems, or we run it for different groups. The CT here is Caltrans. And what shakecast does as an open source software package, it allows the user to automatically retrieve a shake map, compare the shaking of the shaking level with all of their overpasses in this case, and it generates this automatic report that shows the inspection priority prioritized by the likely damage at each of these facilities. And it sends out this report to different critical users that need to decide on the situational awareness and where they may respond. So it's useful in the first hours to a day after an earthquake before the ground truth information comes in. And the way it works is the server just sits there running 7x24. When shake map gets generated, the server decides whether or not it's of area of interest. The user ahead of time builds an inventory of their overpasses for Caltrans or buildings and who gets notified in what situations, and Shakecast will compare the user facilities with the shaking and send notifications out automatically within a few minutes of the shake map being generated. So the interesting thing is all the products that we have online do not include the Shakecast system. Shakecast is only for the particular user. So for this Ridgecrest earthquake, the general public and any general user will see the estimate of losses from a societal point of view, but different users will see their own facilities sent to them directly, but these reports are not sent online because they're privileged information for the particular utility or agency or company. So Caltrans gets bridge information for that earthquake. FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, gets dam information. Nuclear Regulatory Commission gets civilian and nuclear power plants, and the Veterans Affairs gets hospital information as just an example of the systems running in the background while other users get the information that goes on the web page. So there's many Shakecast users in different transportation and other utilities, critical facility departments. And these are just some logos that you might recognize for different companies, different types of industries, different types of facilities that are using this for post-earthquake response, but also for planning purposes by running scenarios or historical events through the system. And I'll skip that. So one of the big users is transportation department. They, for 10 different states, they're running Shakecast, or we're actually running it for them. And when there's an earthquake, we notify them about what bridges are going to be likely impacted and which ones are going to need inspections. I think I'll skip over this. The main point of the Shakecast system is that a lot of utilities still just draw a circle around an epicenter where there's a major earthquake. This is the shaking here, the red shaking is the extreme shaking for a scenario along the San Andreas Fault with an epicenter here on the San Andreas. And a lot of utilities just draw a circle around the epicenter, inspect everything in that region. But this image from Caltrans shows that when they would have this earthquake, the Shakecast system would have them inspect all the bridges in the areas that are affected by strong shaking. And one of the things about the Shakecast system is even where there's strong shaking, the impact might be very different for a bridge that was built in 1966 or a bridge that was built in the 2000s, 2012 in this case, where it's the same shaking level, but this is a modern bridge that's built to designed to earthquake resistance and one that has a lot lower capacity. And so not only is the shaking variable, but the inventory is variable and the outcome may be very different depending on the type of structure there is. I'm going to skip over this. Lastly, I think it's important to see that if you go to one of our web pages, I'm just clicking on the web page now. This is an active web page. When there's an earthquake, I like to go directly to the interactive map here. Click on that. You can then zoom in and see lots of different information. If you go to the layers, I'm going to add, for instance, population density. In this case, the population density is very low where the epicenter is, but as you go towards other regions of the map, you'll see that the population's high. You can also add the seismic stations. In this case, that'll take a minute because there's so many felt reports, but the triangles here are the seismic stations. The circles represent the felt reports, and you'll see those are actually where the population is, which is quite important. We know what the shaking is where people are. And this interactive map allows you to then zoom in and to understand the scope of the problem, but you can also go to the shake map or any of the products. And very importantly, after you go to the bottom of the product, you can see downloads, and this will provide shake maps in a whole variety of flavors for GIS users and different types of users that can automatically use these feeds. Let me go back to my screen here. This is PowerPoint. And in the future, what we're going to have, and this is part of the ENS2 earthquake notification update, you're going to be able to get shaking at a POI, a point of interest. So instead of just a magnitude location, if you put in a location, say someone like grandma in California, you can get a notification if that location shakes over a certain level. That's something that's going to be new. And I won't go into the detailed engineering and critical facility users. The critical facility users use Shakecast, but engineering users have a new tool that allows them to go into any shake map and get the location of shaking at a point of interest and get the full shaking metrics that are needed for engineering analysis. So I think I'll leave it at that. I'll just say that in this tail end of these slides, there's information about all of these tools, detailed information, and I leave with some links that I can share to the group as needed. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to you. Okay.
Thank you. That was very informative. I don't know if we have any questions from anybody. While we wait for any questions, I do have one question. So what are some applications of these projects for mitigation practitioners?
Well, I think the biggest use is in planning scenarios. So, you want to decide what capacity you have to respond. One way to do that is to actually just test out that capacity with an exercise. So these shake maps can be used for an earthquake that you think might happen or you're worried about, that southern San Andreas earthquake. And then we can provide the other products, the loss estimates, the shake map, the likelihood of liquefaction and landsliding, and well as the overall losses from the pager system. And FEMA can run hazards for the same exercise. So they're used quite a bit for those kinds of plannings, as opposed to a map of what might happen in the future over a long period of time. This is, a scenario of what might happen for a particular earthquake. So I think that's really, really key. The important part of that kind of exercise is that you're using the same tools that you might see after an earthquake. So rather than being, unfamiliar with the tools when an earthquake happens and unfamiliar with where to go to get these tools, when you do it through an exercise, you can get a full sense of, what you can do with those tools and then how you can respond in the real situation, at the heat of the moment.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, well,
No.
the recording, I guess, will be available, and you have my contact information. If you need the slides, I can certainly shrink them down and provide those. Just let me know. And thanks for your help organizing.
Yeah. Again, big thanks to our speakers, Dr. Porter and Dr. Wald, and to Millersville University for hosting this webinar series. We'll have this webinar linked on the NHMA website. If you're not a member, if you're watching the recording of this, now's a great time to join. And we're always looking for people to sit on our committees, such as the conference committee, to help promote mitigation across the nation. Just thank everybody for watching this and have a good, safe and relaxing Thanksgiving. Thanks again.
Take care. Bye-bye.